Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this engagement session between the FSCA and the CIS industry. My name is Thembisa Khele. I'm the head of communications at the FSCA, and I'll be your program director for this meeting. Before we kick off the presentation and take you through everything that we've got planned for you, I'd really like to start off by introducing our leadership team at the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, and that would be our commissioner and deputy commissioners. So I'll start off with Commissioner Unathi Kamlana so that you can see him and know him, and I will then introduce the deputy commissioners. Commissioner, if you can say a quick good morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Unathi Kamlana, Commissioner FSCA. Looking forward to the interaction. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Next up, I would like to introduce one of our deputy commissioners, Astrid Luden. Astrid, if you can also say a quick hello.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Look forward to the engagement today.
Thanks, Astrid. Deputy Commissioner Catherine Gibson is also on the call. Kathy? You're on mute, Kathy.
Of course I am. There's always one. Good morning, everybody. Very good to see you here today. As indicated, I'm Catherine Gibson. I'm responsible for regulatory policy and enforcement. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And then we've also got Fazana Badat, and she is the Deputy Commissioner responsible for the CIS industry, which falls under the Conduct of Business Supervision Division. So from a supervisory point of view, she is the person responsible for your industry. Fazana?
Thanks, Thembisa, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're very happy to host you here today and look forward to actually taking today's engagement forward in the future as well. We wish you a very fantastic event. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fazana. So in a moment, we'll hear from our Commissioner Unathi Kamlana, but I'd also like to introduce the other presenters that will be taking us through the conversation today. First up, Gidiboni Dikokwe, the Divisional Executive for Conduct of Business Supervision. Gidi, if you can also say a quick hello.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Wishing you lovely engagements and all the questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Gidi. Next up, Twaidam Debele, the Head of the Investment Providers Department here at the FSCA.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. We are really delighted to be hosting the investment providers industry today. Thank you.
Thanks, Twaida. Last but not least, Marius de Jong, Senior Specialist in the Regulatory Frameworks Department. Marius?
Good morning, everybody. Looking forward to having a chat with you as we go along.
Great, thanks, Maria. So that's the team, the leadership team, and also the team that will be taking you through the presentation today. But on the call, we've also got other colleagues from other departments within the FSCA. So if you have questions that relate to your industry, but maybe might have, a leaning towards the legal department or any other department, we can certainly answer those questions when we get to the Q&A in a short while. Right now, though, please can you help me welcome our Commissioner Unathi Kamlana.
Thank you very much, Thembisa. I hope I am visible and audible to everyone. Good morning again, and it really is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this engagement. Been looking forward to it. And thank you very much for the overwhelming response, I think, in terms of attendance this morning as well. It's not that we have prepared a list of brand new things and novel ideas to talk to you about, but I think it's more about us really hearing from yourselves about our work program, the various publications that we have issued in terms of our strategy, and to see what you think about that, and what is your experience in your various interactions with the FSCA, and to the extent that there are adjustments and things we need to be thinking about in terms of thinking about them differently, to raise those issues in terms of our mandate and what it is that we do. So that's the approach and the openness that we bring to the engagement as the FSCA. I do have a few remarks to share with you before we delve into the formal program. Just a disclaimer up front that this is not scripted. So to the extent that I say things that my colleagues disagree with, fortunately they're coming after me on the program, so they can come back and correct the commissioner. I think firstly, and I won't spend too much time on the economic backdrop. If I talk about the inflation outlook and monetary policy stance this week, I'll definitely get into trouble with the MPC who's meeting right now. I'll also steer clear of the austerity measures of the Treasury and wait for the MTBPS. But I think, what is relevant for us in the backdrop, or from the economic backdrop, is the cost of living crisis for many South Africans, which does continue, and add to that the energy crisis, and of course reductions in government spending. Although they are obviously well intended, I think they do add to that kind of picture, which is a broadly difficult macro picture within which the sector operates, within which the FSCA regulates, and I think it's quite important as a responsive regulator to keep that at the back of the mind. But I think much more specifically for us on the financial sector policy side, I think there's two things of relevance that I want to lift from that backdrop. And the first one is the importance, and maybe much more pronounced now, of creating a regulatory environment that contributes positively to competitiveness. And I mean, this is overall competitiveness, of course, of the economy, but also I think the specific competitiveness of the financial sector. And there are various aspects to that, including the attractiveness of our domestic capital markets, issues of sustainability, and so on. And I say this because while we know, and we don't want to create the wrong impression here, we know that regulation is not a costless exercise. So there's cost to regulation, but we also appreciate that regulation can be inefficient or efficient. And what we are very deliberate about in the various kinds of streams of work that we do is to think about applying regulation in an efficient way. And of course, not efficiency for its own sake, but efficiency as it contributes to effectiveness of the FSCA as a regulator. And of course, we've got various touch points with other regulators as well, like the Prudential Authority, the SARB, etc., to make contributions there with this idea and broad thrust of being efficient and effective. And as colleagues talk later about our regulatory strategy and where we're focusing and what we're doing, that's what informs all of that is this kind of strategic idea of how do we position ourselves as a responsive, efficient, sustainable, effective regulator. Whether you think about the sustainable finance work, cybersecurity, our approach to open finance, etc. That's really kind of one of the things that you should use as a standard of measure for the approaches that we are taking or proposing there. Now, I'm sure we don't always get it right, and that's the point, I guess, of these kinds of engagements and hearing from yourselves about how you experience our approach. That's the first kind of issue. The second issue, and this is a much more specific issue that relates to the overall backdrop, because it's not just FSCA specific. It's the small matter of the FATF grey listing. I think I don't need to talk about why it's important, but just to say that one of the reasons it is, it talks to how South Africa is seen compared to other emerging markets and developing economies. And it's important that, as we drive the specific areas of work around the action plan, that we've got this understanding that we are contributing to something much more important than just to tick those boxes, even if they do get us off the list. Really, what we are delivering on is that we should be seen better than where we currently are. And of course, that reduces costs, that reduces transaction costs, and that's better. Again, it contributes to that original idea I was talking about overall competitiveness. But specifically for ourselves, we are working flat out as the FSCA to deliver on the relevant parts of the FATF recommendations which relate to our work. And it's really about, I think, two things broadly, and I'm sure there are specific things that I will leave out and that colleagues can talk to later. But it's really about, firstly, that we demonstrate improved compliance by our regulated institutions in terms of their AML/CFT obligations. So this is the preemptive stuff, the proactive stuff. This is ongoing risk-based supervision. This is the effective implementation of your own risk management and compliance programs at the institutional level, your reporting obligations, follow-up and supervisory recommendations, etc. This is the stuff that it sounds like bread and butter stuff, but if we get that right, we already are able to demonstrate improved compliance, which FATF is looking for. And then we are also required to, and we've got to do this, to demonstrate the application of our sanctions for breaches of these AML/CFT obligations. Because one of the things that FATF has specifically indicated that they want to see is how we can demonstrate the dissuasiveness of our penalties and sanctions, so that we can demonstrate that they're effective. So obviously, one hopes that everyone in the room here will be examples of good deeds, and there will be no need to demonstrate through the various entities here the dissuasiveness of our penalties. But if the approaches that I was talking to around risk-based supervision and then the proactive stuff doesn't work, we do have to apply our sanctions and to demonstrate that they actually work, and therefore we'll do that as well. We are required to. But clearly the important message here, and this is what I want to emphasize, is that the starting point is not just the application of penalties. The starting point is the implementation of a robust risk-based supervisory approach. But when that doesn't work, when it doesn't produce desired outcomes, then we have to move to taking enforcement action. So that's really the approach. And needless to say, we don't have a lot of time. 2025 is around the corner. And we do have frequent or regular points of reporting to FATF so that they can get a sense that there's movement and momentum, and we're doing all of that both as the FSCA but also in terms of what we're exposed to as the other parts of the official sector, where various things need to be delivered on to comply, to address what is on the action plan for the country. And we always get this question about political buy-in and leadership and so on. There's a very high level of appreciation of this as a priority in government. I think it's important to say that, And Treasury is working very hard to coordinate within government, not just the finance family of institutions, but within government in general on the various parts, so that we can act in concert and together to get ourselves off the grey list. So I don't think there's anyone in government who needs to be convinced about how important this is and how much we need to focus on it. We are ramping up capacity internally. We're getting additional resources in the MLCFT supervision space. We are collaborating with the PA and the FIC on matters of mutual interest. And as you know, there are specific programs and projects as well, such as the licensing of crypto asset service providers, which is underway. So there's good momentum overall, and we are driving this as much as we can, given the time constraints and so on that are applicable. So that's that on the grey listing. And I'm sure there'll be questions, and there are colleagues here who will assist in taking those questions from yourselves. Then two last topical policy matters I thought I would just talk to as well. The first one is tax policy. So this issue of the taxation of CISs and some of the anxiety that's existed around the application of the current law in sort of the SARS audits and so on. So on this, what we can say is that Treasury is seized with the question. They are doing the work because they have to lead on providing a clear direction on tax policy. I think there's lots of appreciation about the impact of uncertainty, given how long this question has remained unresolved, but also that there are immediate concerns from specific entities about what the outcomes might be of particular audits and so on. Now, obviously, needless to say that taxpayers are not without recourse, even in terms of the existing legislation. It obviously can be tedious and painful, depending on how it is managed by all the parties. But the tax policy work is being led by Treasury, and they're doing it from what we understand. And in terms of what happens before that is finalized, we will have to apply existing law and existing recourse mechanisms, and we'll work together to understand what the impacts are and how they should be managed. I think it is in the best interests of all of us, FSCA, the Treasury, and certainly from a stability perspective, the SAR, to get this right and to manage it well. So that's that on the tax issue. The last issue is this issue of foreign exposure limits, which is also another important and topical policy issue in the space. I think here, it's important to distinguish between two things. That's certainly how I think about it. So the first are business model specific issues that might be affected in a particular way by the implementation of a broad strategy of government around foreign exposure limits and exchange control policy, I guess, in general. So that's one that's specific. I think that the specific business model issues require specific interventions and responses by whoever, even if it's the Treasury or the SARB, so that they can be dealt with. But I think that should not detract from the broad strategy, which I think has been clearly articulated consistently over time by government, around the approach of enabling the attainment of foreign exposure and diversification from a foreign perspective through domestic institutions, primarily as part of the gradual liberalization of exchange controls. That's certainly how we've understood this for a very long time. That's eventually what you want to be getting to as a space is much more macro-prudential considerations and approaches to the management of capital flows, away from a very archaic, rudimentary kind of artificial system of limits. Our assessment is that therefore the decisions around increasing the limit to where it is right now was very much in line with that approach. Now, obviously, all of us have got to watch what the behavior is, whether there are certain risks that need to be managed in a particular way, given that decision. But in us doing that, we are doing what regulators have to do, either from a microprudential perspective around specific institutions, or from a macroprudential perspective around the system. That's what regulators around the world have to do. But the point is that we don't think that there's any decision that's been taken recently that detracts or is contradictory to what we've understood for the longest time to be the philosophy and strategy of government around foreign exposure limits and how they should be applied on institutions and so on. So let me leave it there for the opening remarks. Happy to come back to any of these issues and whatever else that even I've not touched on in the opening remarks when we're doing Q&A. But for now, let me hand back Thembisa and for the rest of the program. Thanks again for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Thank you for those opening remarks. And I know that maybe you might have some questions specific to what the Commissioner has covered. If you do, please can I ask you to drop those questions in the Q&A section. And at the end of the presentation, when we take all of the other questions, we will ask the Commissioner to address the questions that you will have popped in there as well. So the way that we are going to run the session today, as we go into the presentation, firstly, we'll look at, the policy considerations and talk about our regulation plan for the next 3 years. And then we'll go into the supervisory focus areas. What's keeping us up at night? What are some of the things that, we really obsess about and we would love to talk to you about as an industry? And then we'd also like to share the results of our market conduct survey that we did and, talk you through some of the findings there, and also touch on sustainable finance, which is also quite topical, as you know. We will set, enough time to take questions from you, but that's how the flow of the presentation is going to be. First up, let me ask Marius de Jong. We introduced him earlier to you. He'll take you through the key regulatory developments and talk about some of the policy considerations there. Thanks, Marius.
Good morning again, all. So I'll be focusing mainly on the CIS work being done. Let's kick off in terms of this, the overall legislation. It's the COFI bill. The COFI bill will, although we've included that dedicated chapter regarding CIS, collective investment schemes, that dedicated chapter in collective investment schemes, collective investment schemes in the COFI bill, focus mainly on your empowerment issues and the issues that are currently in Collective Investment Schemes Control Act that made sense to transfer to the COFI bill, the more static and high-level legislation. So therefore, the CISCA will be repealed, but before CISCA is repealed, the entire CIS current framework will be transitioned into conduct standards. So there will be a cascading approach, the COFI bill with the more fixed and empowering legislation, and then the conduct standards below that. And I'll speak a bit now to some of the stuff that we are busy with currently, some of the projects that we're busy with currently. For some of you, the references to the notices might not make sense, so I'll talk to that. But the CIS industry, of course, knows Board Notice 90. Board Notice 90 is, we're reworking the entire Board Notice 90. That is, of course, the standard that determines all the securities and assets that may be included, the manner that they may be included, the limits, and so forth. The joint work group with the PA is progressing well. However, you will understand that given the intensity and the volume of this work, we are followers of, and so subject to, the Financial Stability Board and ASCO imperatives that they require for inclusion. That takes a lot of work. So we have decided also to include in the board notice 90 revision your liquidity tools in the event of liquidity pressure in the markets. In other words, your suspensions, your side pocketing, and so forth. So that's also being worked into that. So it's a large piece of work. It gets very intense. We've added in a lot of liquidity management and risk management aspects. Hopefully we will be working with it more as to main body and a guideline. The time that we believe will be ready for submission to National Treasury will be close to the end of 2024. All right, so the rewrite of board notice 257. 257 is the notice that determine the conditions in terms of which foreign collective investment schemes may solicit investments in South Africa. There's been quite a bit of uncertainty around a number of the regulations therein. So that has to be redrafted. So it aims to deal with the uncertainties regarding acceptable investments and approaches by foreign funds and their categorization. We believe that we might be ready to publish it for consultation by the end of the year. So look out for that one. The one thing many people will be interested in is the accounting standard for collective investment schemes. We have for many years not had an accounting standard, and we've fallen back onto IFRS. As we know, IFRS is too extensive and costly for investors. So we are doing our own accounting standard for collective investment schemes. The nature thereof is such that, of course, we can't publish it until COFI has been promulgated as an act. But the nature of the content is such that we can consult on the content. At the end of the day, when we publish it, it'll only require a covering page that makes it law, but the annexures, the body of the document, is basically the accounting practice standard and the financial reporting standard that will come out of that. So that we've drafted that content with the help of industry auditors. So we are now ready to start consulting, but by the nature of the instrument, the first avenues of consulting will obviously be IRBA and SAICA and so forth. So once we've finalized with them what we need to, then we will publish it for, and we're at that stage now. So we will be discussing with them in the coming month. And then whatever comes out of that will go to public consultation. So look out for that. I hope it will also be available for industry and public consultation early next year, or let's at least say the first quarter. We are currently doing some interim amendments to Board Notice 90. The one was a request. So there's two interim amendments. One is just to finalize the legal changes or the legislative changes to enable investment into actively managed exchange traded funds. We know they've been launched and they're going, and there's a lot of interest in it. It's just to make sure that our funds CIS funds can invest in it. And then the other immediate change the industry asked for, which makes sense, is that whereas current limitation to invest in one foreign fund is 20% per fund, we are allowing it to be 45% for a foreign fund. So your maximum exposure to one foreign fund would be 45% and not 20%. Okay, we're working on a conduct standard to what we call ensure enhanced regulation for CISs. So what happened with our last FSAP review is there's a couple of small issues that do not fit anywhere in legislation, or they need to be dealt with much more urgently. So we're looking at all of those that have not yet found a place in other legislation to make sure that they are in a instrument to address these financial sector assessment program findings. Something that is a bit further down the horizon as a massive piece of work is the regulatory framework for alternative investment fund activities. What we're talking about there is to have what we do not currently have is a house, to put it that way, in our legislation for products such as private equity funds, property syndicates, unlisted REITs, and so forth. So we have started with a project to scope, for a better word, what needs to be in that legislation. It's still in the internal consultation phase. So once we've bedded down more or less what it is that we want and the direction it should take, we will be going out on getting external assistance and probably going out and tender for assistance from an expert in this field to help us with it. But I think I want to state here that any inputs that the industry want to give us and send us at this stage will all be welcome. This is an area that's much of a learning curve for us, where we come out of areas where we have expertise in various fields. I think alternative investments is not one of them, and we recognize that. We have done a harmonized standard, or drafted a harmonized standard on custody custodians and nominated custodians. And as a matter of interest, the nominated custodians is coined to move away from the nominees terminology, and the simple reason for that is nominees are seen in the company space in a different light than we do. In our environment, they are actually custodians, but they are institution specific. So this work has, as I said, have progressed very far. Drafts have been done, but it cannot be finalized until, so the COFI obviously is still in the process of we can expect some changes and so forth. So possibly, so pardon me, we can only finalize this standard on custody once we have seen if there are any necessary changes to COFI or anything comes out of that. And then after that, obviously, it will go out for consultation. Something that industry has been waiting for ages is the rework of our Board Notice 92, which is the advertising, marketing, and disclosure requirements for collective investment schemes managers. This piece of work has the one problem that it cuts across industries. In other words, your advertising, marketing, disclosures cuts across industries or products, which would mean that at some stage, and probably more to the end of COFI, would require that we do a bit of harmonization first, and then sit with what is CIS specific, and then have a separate standard for collective investment schemes on this. So there will be two instruments coming out. The one will be a harmonized one, and another one will be the CIS specific. But we cannot finalize that now because of the necessary to do this sequential. Okay, so that deals basically with the collective investment schemes direct issues. So the next topic is something that many have been interested in on a more what shall I say? There's such opposing positions on this, but I think our job is to make sure that we understand it and that we get ready to apply it in the manner that it is finally decided upon. So your revenue laws and pension laws amendments contemplate that the two-pot system, which is actually three-pot system and is now recoined in law as proposed law as a components, will essentially provide for a savings component for retirement investment. The legislation essentially works with a savings component, a retirement component. 1/3 goes into savings component, another 2/3 goes into retirement component. The savings component is intended there to be available for relief when the members are under severe pressure to be able to acquire funds, and that is something that came out, and we all know about that in the during the COVID situation. So the other component will be your vested component. That's basically the third one, and it is when it kicks in March, it is intended that 10% or 25,000, whichever is the smaller, shall I say. In other words, 10% below 25,000. 25,000 gets transferred to the savings component, and the pension, the member of the can then withdraw either the full savings or a minimum of 2,000 at a time when they need the money from the savings. The big difference is that the retirement component must remain invested and can only be applied to purchase an annuity on retirement. So your vested component is obviously that which you have in your fund up until the date of implementation, which is your 1 March 2024 balances. I've spoken about the seeding for the savings component. Legacy retirement annuity funds may apply for exemption. The system will apply to all funds, all retirement annuity, all pension and retirement funds, including the public sector funds. And then we expect, so the proposed legislation called for comments up until the 18th of December. Public hearings are held, and it's expected that the outcomes will be tabled at the medium-term the medium-term budget policy statement. Yeah, I think I've said whatever is most important in this topic. So that's all from me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Marius. Thank you so much. And before I ask Gidi to come in and take us through some of the supervisory focus areas, let me just remind everybody that if you do have questions, there is the chat functionality, the Q&A section. You can pop your question in there as the presenters are going through the content. And at the end of the presentation, we will then take your questions and offer answers. Gidi, over to you.
Thank you, Tembisa, and good morning again to everyone. From my side, I will be touching on the supervisory focused areas. And I'm waiting for my slides to be on. So this is so.
They are up. Gidi, we can see them.
Okay. All right. From my side, they're not up, but I will use what I have here. So from the supervisory point of view, we've been looking at cybersecurity and operational resilience as one of the top concerns for us as the industry. And we also had concerns around the rollout of artificial intelligence, potentially leading to misuse. And very recently, we've been seeing impersonation fraud. And this is very worrying for us because all these scammers, they are targeting our registered entities. And only in the past 3 months, we have already issued 14 warnings relating to these impersonations. So in summary, what we are seeing is that most of these scams are being on the social media platform, and the most famous one being WhatsApp. We've been receiving from you, our regulated entities, and we're trying our best to make sure that we inform our members of the public. We are also driving various consumer education activities, and our message being that our members of the public should only deal with authorized financial services providers. And most importantly, they need to know what are these financial services providers licensed to sell, so that they are aware and they are able to identify the scammers. In last year alone, from these campaigns, we were able to reach over 27 million consumers, and we hope to continue to educate our consumers to be aware and contact us if they are in any doubt. And we also encourage you as the regulated entities to inform us if you suspect that your entity could be targeted by these scams. The next topical issue that I'm going to touch on, which is something that the Commissioner has already spoke about, it's the impact of the increased offshore exposure allowance. We understand that the allocation of our funds are very flexible in terms of investing offshore. And this allocation is not mainly the driver for investing offshore. The decision to invest offshore really lies in a number of factors. One of them would be the investment mandate of the portfolio, which mainly look at diversity, looking at the performance of foreign funds, and also what your customers demand as preference for their investment. We have looked at the estimate within the industry, and we're seeing that when we look at the uptake so far, it is estimated that the range is between 38% and 40%. And according to some of the researchers, this limit could be now at 43%. But as the FSCA, we will continue to monitor the developments, as the Commissioner mentioned, and we invite you as the industry to also engage us if there are any issues that you'd like to highlight to us, and see how we can move forward in terms of this offshore limit allowances. And Tembisa, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kiri. And now I'm going to ask Twaita to take us through the results of the market conduct survey, and thereafter touch on sustainable finance. Thanks, Twaita.
Thank you, Tembisa, and good morning once again to everyone. I also don't see the slides. I'm not sure if you are projecting yet, but that's all right.
Yes, we
I
are
will
projecting.
use the slides on my side. Okay, I guess technology has got the better of me this morning. I don't see them. So I will be presenting on the results of the market conduct survey, as Thembisa has indicated, and probably to many of the participants on the call, this is not something that is new, because we have previously engaged in various forums regarding the work that the authority did in terms of the market conduct survey. But I will just touch lightly on the results and then some of the key highlights that we picked up as we did this work on the survey. So the survey was informed as a start by work that KPMG and Ernst & Young did in 2020 and 2021 on the overall financial services sector, where they conducted a survey within the banking space, insurers and asset managers, to test the maturity of the journey of the entities on their conduct outcomes since we became the FSCA and focusing on conduct as the regulator. So some of the things that they looked at was after the promulgation of the FSR, how entities were looking and shifting from TCF outcomes, but focusing more on conduct outcomes for their customers. Within our space, the results of both those surveys revealed that much was not happening within the asset management space. And as a result, from our side as the regulator, we then decided to conduct our own survey just to test whether things had then shifted. And we did this at the end of 2021. In the survey, one of the things we first started doing before we even embarked on the journey was to conduct a benchmark exercise across two regulators, which was the FSCA and the ASIC, and just to understand how they approached conduct from a regulatory perspective. When we looked at the conduct survey, we then explored 5 key elements that we believed were pertinent to give us just an overview on what is happening regarding conduct within our space. So we focused on corporate culture, which is how the boards are aware in terms of the oversight and understanding the risks within the businesses, and overall speaking to the governance and the responsibility that they have in understanding what is happening from a conduct risk perspective and the frameworks that are there. We further looked at the product life cycle. Here it was more on the design of the products and whether at the start of the development of an investment product, there are considerations that are given for conduct risk and whether there is any disclosure in terms of identification of product risk. We then looked at the business models and processes for the entities, and within that, what we wanted to see was to understand the impact of conduct risk within the operations of the businesses and how they then look throughout the value chain within the structures of their businesses and how those value chain might have an impact on conduct risk. We also looked at some of the contextual factors, and here our consideration was more looking at the environment that businesses operate in within an economic perspective and how some of the macroeconomic elements might affect the businesses and resulting in conduct risk issues. And lastly, we looked at the monitoring and reporting of conduct risk outcomes. And here, what we wanted to assess was the tools that entities use to monitor and report on market conduct and how they develop certain indicators in their dashboards to be able to identify the conduct risks that could impact the business. So some of the key insights that we came across as we analyzed the surveys, or rather the information that was submitted through the survey, was that in terms of the investment providers context, there seemed to be still a limited articulation on market conduct outcomes. And by this, we mean when we looked at some of the evidence that our entities submitted through either their enterprise-wide risk frameworks, what we saw was that there was not really a separate consideration for market conduct, and there was not a separate consideration in terms of dedicated and approved market conduct risk frameworks that the entities have put in place. While we appreciate the work that the entities have done in trying to incorporate TCF outcomes into their enterprise-wide risk frameworks, we saw that there has not been much of a shift from just applying the TCF principles in ensuring that they embed good market conduct outcomes. And what we saw was that when they look at the enterprise risk management frameworks, even though they sort of look at conduct through TCF, as I said, but we were not able to see that there was really a focus just to look at conduct outcomes and how these would then impact the business. So from our side, we have done a lot of work, as I said, in terms of engaging and socializing the results of the survey within various forums in our industry. And we do continue to engage our entities through our supervisory work by engaging the boards or the relevant committees in terms of how they also see conduct risk impacting their business and how they see that they could take this forward. But further, we also urge compliance teams, because they do a lot of work on the ground in terms of understanding the business. So in terms of developing conduct risk frameworks, we particularly invite the compliance teams to shift their focus, not just looking at TCF or the technical breaches that they look at when they do their compliance checks, but to be part of developing relevant conduct risk frameworks within the business and in terms of what they see as they do and monitor their work. And this will also help the enhancing of the reporting within the business, because if we look at how the compliance teams engage the boards and the relevant committees in identifying some of the issues that they pick up through their compliance check, we believe that compliance really plays a critical role in enhancing the reporting of conduct risks, and also then managing that interface between the boards and the business. So that is all on the market conduct survey. I will then move to the sustainable investment, if I may, Tembisa, because I still don't see the slides.
Yes, please go ahead, Clayton.
Thank you so much. So the Commissioner did mention in his opening remarks how sustainable finance, or ESG, is one of the topical things within our industry, and not just being topical within the industry. Sustainable finance forms an imperative part of our strategy as the regulator. So in terms of our strategy, we also articulate how we contribute to promoting the development of an innovative, inclusive, and sustainable financial system. And with the background that I have just given, the FSCA also published a statement in March 2023 on sustainable finance and investing that informs the work that we intend to do to support, number one, the strategy that we have that speaks to sustainable finance, and secondly, just to understand the journey of our entities in terms of looking at sustainable finance. Within the investment providers context, we have since launched a survey in our industry where we want to assess the readiness of our industry in integrating sustainable finance or ESG consideration in their investment strategies and overall operations of the business. The survey was published in August and with a closing date of 13 October. What we intend to do with the information from this survey is to, number one, look at the findings and how the entities within our sector are maturing in their journey in terms of looking at sustainable finance. Secondly, we also want to provide a comprehensive and informative overview in terms of our strategy, as I said, that will then inform how we, as a regulator, develop a regulatory and supervisory framework to support the work that the FSCA is looking at regarding sustainable finance. In addition, we have also planned some industry engagements through various industry bodies, and this is just to take them through the work that the regulator is doing on sustainable finance and investing, and also to engage the understanding of the industries regarding the statement that we issued as the regulator, and consider to a certain extent the scope of work and priorities that will inform our regulatory and supervisory framework going forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kwaita. And that brings us to the end of our presentation, and for us to have an opportunity to ask some questions if you've got. And if you don't have questions, and since we've got a little bit of time, without putting our Deputy Commissioner Kathy Gibson on the spot, maybe we'll give her an opportunity to share a little bit about our retail customer behavior study and customer sentiments study that was done by the FSCA and has some findings that relate to your industry as well. So if we've got some time and she's prepared to share a little bit about that study, we might just give her an opportunity to do that. But before we do, let me just check if we have any questions from you. All right. We've got one. Let me just have a quick look at that. The question we have is from Lange Ngabinde, and any one of our presenters can take that question. And Lange is asking about two things, really. The first one is about the laws that affect foreign managers that are managing assets or managing South African assets, and what laws are applicable there when it comes to the FSCA legislation related taxation, BBBEE, employment equity. And he's asking, with regards to the increased offshore exposure, shouldn't we require those foreign managers that are managing South African assets to comply with all of these laws in the land? Anybody that would like to take that question?
Thembisa, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner.
Thanks. I think that question is from Malungelo Zilimbola. I think the question from Lange is
yes, you're right. Thank you.
On budgets. Just to say that, so I agree with the principle that I think is behind that question, which is one of level playing fields. I think, though, the devil is in the detail. It's about what type of entities these are, where they are located, and therefore how much of the South African regulatory framework, not just the FSCA, I mean, the other examples that you give there as well, can be applied to them. So I think it's something to think about, to the extent that the gaps that exist to contribute to an unlevel playing field. But I think, yeah, in terms of how one applies that and how one enforces, of course, compliance to local regulatory and other requirements on entities that are not South African or South African located, can get a bit tricky. Thembisa, I can maybe also take Lange's question if you allow me on budget.
Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner. Yes.
Yes, so we have just published, actually, I think it was yesterday, the proposals on levies as they apply to various sectors. I think this point that you're raising, Lange, on lack of differentiation between bank and non-bank OTPs is one that we will look at. Feel free, though, to maybe provide a little bit of context on that. And I think the comment period, Thembisa, I don't know if you've got it handy, but it's about, I think, about 2 months that we've given, and then we will consider comments on the budgets and how we are applying the Levies Act. Sorry?
Yes, that's correct. It's about 2 months.
Yes, and then we will come back to the sector on how we've dealt with the various comments. But thanks for the point that you raised on that differentiation. Thanks, Thames.
Thanks very much, Commissioner, and thank you for the questions. Please do keep them coming. There is one around the slides and whether or not we're going to share those. The answer is a resounding yes. We will share those slides with you. We have your contact details since you RSVP'd, so we will share those with you after the session. Any other questions? Please do pop them into the chat. At this point, I'd like to just give opportunity to Deputy Commissioner Kathy Gibson to just talk about the study that I mentioned earlier. Kathy?
Thanks very much, everybody. Maybe just before I do that, I saw that there was another question about issuing draft legislation over the December-January period. We have double checked, and there isn't any that's scheduled to be published over that time, particularly for this industry. But you are able to track that yourself through the regulation plan, which has a table at the back, so that you can follow exactly where the legislation is heading. And the regulatory instruments. When I'm talking legislation, I mean our regulatory instruments as well. So thanks, Thembisa. And I just wanted to bring your attention to some of this work that the FSCA has done as well. What we spoke about earlier was the industry survey and unpacking some of the industry behavior and practices. What we have also started doing now is recognizing that there's another very important stakeholder in this space, which is the consumer, of course. And so besides the social media sentiment work, which we've been doing for some time now, this was a deep dive to understand just how the consumers are thinking about the sector and some of the behavioral drivers and particularly we asked some really interesting questions about things. So one of the things that we asked about was bank accounts and why people aren't using their bank accounts more and how we would need to get them to shift to use bank accounts more. One of the other areas we looked at, which was particularly interesting, was around savings and how South Africans are seeing the savings landscape, and particularly between the formal and the informal space. And this is really important, I think, for the sector to be paying attention to if one is wanting to not only grow market share, which often is where the attention is, but how to really develop savings and promote savings within the country as a whole and increase that aggregate level of savings, and particularly through the formal sector. So we know that people are saving too little in general. Through FinScope, we can see that nearly half of adults are not saving at all. And this is even worse. And as we start getting to younger population groups, we see that worsens a bit. Interesting, though, what we saw is that customers really put a value onto savings, and particularly onto investments, and the kinds of products that this sector in particular is offering. And in some instances, even more so than retirement funds. People don't see retirement funds and investment products as the same thing. There's actually more of a bugbear attitude towards retirement funds, as opposed to on the investment side, where consumers equate owning these kinds of products with wealth and financial stability, which definitely shows the potential and the market opportunity there. The investment products on the back of that are really the item that people pick up as being most important to have. So after having a bank account, this is really where people want to be. Next slide, please. So one of the, we often hear around, and, I've just said it myself, that people are not saving or not saving enough. Interestingly enough, though, we have to look and disaggregate between the formal and the informal sector. And what we know is that a lot more people are actually saving through the informal sector and through stokvels. And so we asked the question around why, and what is it that you see happening through a stokvel that you don't see happening through the formal sector. And basically what this graph is showing is the black line is the informal savings and the where high value is put there. So you can see for the informal savings, the kinds of things are: the rules are fair, people around me save like this, it's easy to save money, it forces me to save money, I can fix it if there's a problem. So it really is around, I suppose, the trust and fairness aspects, and familiarity. On the formal savings, it scores highly around, I know how my money will grow. So really the growth prospects, I get better access to more financial products. So there's a recognition of financial inclusion, and I can see my savings grow. So I mean, really what this is saying is there's a trade-off that's happening here between what people see as trusted and easy products versus those where the money can grow, but is maybe a little bit more tricky. And what isn't reflected in this graph, but what we see coming very strongly through the survey is just how confounded so many South Africans are by the plethora of products and the complexity of products that often lands up putting them off, and when they land up only making financial decisions when they really have to. So, for example, there's a life event like, you're saving for a car or a house, or you've now having children and you have to prepare to send your children through school or university, etc. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. This really was just a taster. So this is the question we asked here is how would you switch? And there was a very interesting experiment that was run that was able to work out these preferences. And on the formal, so how to save to, I suppose the main drivers between them from a formal savings perspective is that people see it as being far too ambiguous. Saving, just putting aside a general sum of money for no visual reason, which you can really attach something to, as opposed to saving towards a specific goal. On the formal side, withdrawals feel like a failure, because saving should never be spent. And I think there's a message there in terms of how we even communicate around savings, that it's untouchable. So, and the conversation we were having earlier around the two-pot system really goes to this, that it becomes quite a trauma for people actually to be engaging sometimes with the formal sector. You've been putting your savings in, now you want to draw the money out, there's heavy penalties, the sense of failure, it really comes through strongly. Whereas on the informal savings, it's permitted, it's flexible, there's clear rules, and it's what happens because it's accommodating everyone's livelihoods. And then lastly, there's no indication when you're done, as opposed to with the informal, where it's much more time-based, and so not only do you know what you're saving for, for how long, and that just makes it more manageable for people. So thank you, Tembisa. I just wanted to give our colleagues a taster and really remember that there's the consumer on the other side of all of this, and so it's not just regulation for the sake of regulation. Please do think, continue to be thinking around the customer needs and have a look at the study. It's really exciting work that's come through. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for that. And also just to remind everybody that you can get the study on the FSCA website. You can also get, a lot more than that. We've got a paper that we've just published recently on sustainable finance. You may have seen it. Quite touched on that earlier. The study, the paper, and also the press release and the publication around the budget proposals, also on the FSCA website. So please do feel free to have a look at those and, give us your thoughts as well. If you have any, if you'd like to talk to us about any of the work that we've put out recently, please feel free to get in touch with us. communications@fsca.co.za. communications@fsca.co.za is the easiest way to get hold of us. I see there is one other question that's coming through before we take closing remarks. Let me just have a quick look at that. The question coming in anonymously says, what are some of the plans that we as the FSCA have in order to ensure that accountable institutions understand and mitigate money laundering, terrorist financing, and things of that nature? Are there awareness efforts that are planned around this? I think this speaks a lot to what you spoke about earlier, Commissioner, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking that question, please.
In fact, Tembisa, I was going to suggest that Deputy Commissioner Badat, as responsible for that area, to maybe talk to the specific initiatives that we have planned, and then she can also make the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Commissioner. Deputy Commissioner Fazana Badat, if you can, please, and as you answer that question, then also share your closing remarks with us. Thanks very much.
Yes, and thanks for the question. I was frantically trying to type on the chat that I will take that question as part of the closing, and it's quite an important question, and it's something that I also wanted to emphasize as part of the closing. I think the commissioners alluded to the work that we're doing around the grey listing and our contribution to the National Action Plan in order to try to get off of the grey listing as expeditiously as possible. I think the first comment I do want to make before I go to the question itself is how incredibly important it is for there to be a coordinated effort, both between the regulators as well as the regulators and government, as well as collaboration between the regulators and entities in terms of finding collective solutions and collective approaches to address the action items that are that the remediation action items that FATF has identified. I think in the absence of this collective effort by key stakeholders, it is going to be quite challenging for us to get off the grey list by the 25th of, by January 2025. Coming back to specific action items that the FSCA is working on, so there were two specific issues that were identified through the grey listing process. The one was around the FSCA as one of the key regulators to increase our own internal resourcing and capacitation in order to address AML CFT risks, and there's a lot of work being done right now to increase the breadth and the depth and the scope of our supervisory capacity around this. Together with that, I think there was a general recommendation across regulators to implement more dissuasive and proportionate sanctions for AML CFT risks. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is it does relate directly to the question that's been asked on the chat. In order for us to be effective So FATF is not just looking for us to implement technical issues, they're also looking for us to be effective in terms of how we respond to AML-CFT issues. And what that means is that both the regulators themselves need to be able to understand the AML-CFT risks impacting various sectors, but we also need to implement a robust and risk-based approach to supervision. But in order for us to be effective in that, we also need to make sure that the sector itself has a very rigorous and ongoing understanding of the risks impacting the sector. So there is an expectation from our side that entities themselves continue to understand, assess, and identify AML-CFT risks on an ongoing basis. But to the point of collaboration and coordination, one of the things that our AML-CFT team is busy working on is a number of awareness initiatives. This is actually a priority issue within our supervisory plan, to do awareness initiatives with accountable institutions, not just to understand AML-CFT and finance terrorist risks, but also how to apply a risk-based approach in managing the obligations in terms of FSCA and of course broader AML-CFT compliance issues. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around the types of awareness initiatives, but what we've got planned at the moment are obviously individual engagements between our AML-CFT team and accountable institutions. We're also working together with both the Prudential Authority and the Financial Intelligence Center in terms of increasing our awareness across the board around AML-CFT risks. We've also got a number of webinars planned for the industry, and we will also be publishing some of the webinars on the website so that institutions can access them whenever they have the need. We're also planning on publishing a lot more around the supervisory work that we've done, providing a lot more information around the enforcement action that we've taken, as well as the considerations that we take into account when assessing AML-CFT risks. I think one important example I can share is a release that we did a few weeks ago, which actually shared with the public some of the considerations that the FIC Appeal Board also took into account in terms of how institutions should manage their risks in terms of FSCA, basically emphasizing the point that this is not a mechanical or technical compliance obligation, but there needs to be kind of very rigorous risk-based approach. And things like the RMCP aren't just bureaucratic or administrative requirements, but it's actually quite an important foundational tool in order to manage money laundering and terrorist financing risks. But I think the short answer to the question on the chat is that the issue of awareness is a very high priority for the AML-CFT team. Together with the planned interventions, which we will communicate on going forward, what I do encourage institutions is also to reach out to our AML-CFT team if they would like to have targeted engagements around awareness, etc. If they've got questions around the robustness of their own risk management plans, mitigation plans, etc. I think as we go through this process of capacitating our internal team, where we also drawing on kind of training and awareness from some of our international counterparts, it would be useful if we could share that with you both individually, institutions individually, as well as the sector as a whole. So on that point, I think moving from the AML-CFT issues, I also just want to provide an open invitation to institutions to actually reach out to us for broader engagement opportunities on other strategic issues and other hot topics that you would like to engage with us on, either on a formal or an informal basis. I know our supervisory teams have very strong relationships with our institutions on specific compliance issues, but I think what we're trying to do with this engagement and future engagements such as this is to actually allow an opportunity for the sector to talk to us more generally around some of our strategic issues, where we are going from from a supervisory perspective, what some of our regulatory priorities are. So I want to emphasize this is an open invitation. I want to thank some of the institutions in the investment sector who actually proactively have started engaging with us either on an annual or a biannual basis, where we actually have executive level engagements around strategic issues. I think that's very helpful for us as a leadership team as well. So for those of you who aren't involved in those types of engagements with us, I also encourage you to reach out to us and we can set up those more senior level engagements to talk through in a lot more detail some of the strategic issues. And I think finally, just to say thank you very much to the FSCA team for the efforts in putting together today's event. I'm sure you'll all agree with me, as much as there was a lot that was covered in the presentations today, this is just a very small snapshot of the work that we're doing and the work that we know your compliance teams are busy with, even outside of the regulatory work coming from the FSCA. I know there's a lot of regulatory compliance issues, compliance developments that your compliance teams are busy with, our team as well. But like I said, we welcome the opportunity to engage with you on some of these other issues in more detail. We thank you very much for taking your time to spend this hour and a half with us today. We do hope it's been useful, and we do look forward to having a lot more of these engagements going forward. So thank you to the FSCA team, thank you to all of you for the time, and thank you Tembisa for doing such a wonderful job in being our MC today. I'll hand back over to you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Fazana. And before we say a final goodbye, there is one last question that's come through. And that question says, what are your views on potential delays around the two-part system? What happens if funds are not ready, given the system's work and the rule changes and other things that might be applicable? And I'm going to ask Deputy Commissioner Astrid Luden to take that one. Astrid, if you would, please.
Thank you, Tembisa. I was just at a conference, a pension funds industry or retirement funds industry conference yesterday. There was a lot of engagement around this. So I'm sure you're aware that the decision around the implementation date is not an FSCA decision, that's a policy decision, and that's one that's made by the legislature as well as the Treasury. We have, of course, engaged with them on this, but I think our position is that if the implementation date is the 1st of March 2024, then we need to work very closely with the industry to see how we can ensure compliance to the extent possible. So one of the areas that we're prioritizing are rule amendments. I think the issues that need to be prioritized are rule amendments, member engagement, and education. So on rule amendments, we are proposing engagements with administrators so that we can, with the understanding that the rules that administrators have are probably fairly standardized across the different types of funds that they administer, and therefore that there's an element of standardization around rule changes that we can anticipate. And so we are encouraging administrators to engage with us in advance, so over the next 6 months, so that we can clarify or I suppose at a broad level have some kind of agreement on what appropriate rule changes would be. And so we anticipate that during the first 3 months that the amendments come into force. From a rule amendment perspective, as an organization, we will focus on those. We'll make arrangements for emergency amendments. So I think what I'm trying to convey is that we need to prepare for a possible implementation date in 6 months' time, and we need to be very systematic and pragmatic about it. We will be engaging with the industry. We are engaging, and we're going to be One of the things we also will be doing is issuing guidance. So in order for this implementation to go as smooth as possible, we will need to work together, and as the FSCA, we're committed to providing guidance and support in ensuring that this is as smooth as we can make it.
Thanks very much, Astrid. Thank you so much for that. And that's how we come to the end of our session today. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. I hope that you found the engagement quite useful, and that, you know, we can have more of these kinds of interactions in the future, as we, the FSCA, are planning to. But also, you know, there are other opportunities for you to interact with us. Please do so. Just another quick reminder that the budget proposals that we spoke about earlier, that press release went out yesterday. The period for you to comment is up until the 2nd of November 2023, 2nd November 2023. I've also put that response on the chat as well. On that note, thank you so much. Thank you for having joined us. Looking forward to interacting with you in the future. Thank you and bye-bye.